Cool. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I've been loving your tweets. I've been loving getting to know you in the digital format. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, excited to be here, man. Thanks.
Likewise. So I got to do this. And I was thinking to myself, am I really going to open the podcast with such a lame fucking question? But Barack Obama follows you on Twitter. And like, what was that moment like when basically the most famous person in the world followed you on Twitter? Like, I guarantee you remember that moment. I got to
I,
know.
I do remember that moment, but it's not it's not a moment that you would think. It's not like I met Barack and then he followed me or anything like that. I think it was just like during the heat of one of his campaigns, uh, I followed him because I wanted to find out more information about what's going on, and he was following people back. And
Hmm.
so now I'm just one of those lucky few that is like followed by Barack like indefinitely,
Yeah.
which is pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
All right. I get it. But at least it's still like a little pin you can like carry
Totally.
around with you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's so funny because like, I don't have a huge online presence. That's not been my story. I haven't been out there trying to be an influencer or doing, that sort of route. But when you get followed by somebody like I just got followed by Paris Hilton the
I
other
know.
day
I was
because
going to
of the
ask you
NFT
about that
space.
too.
Yeah. And that was just such a trip because you're like, okay, like you know what I mean? I mean, I know it's like her social media manager or whatever that was like, let me just follow people in the NFT space, but
Yeah.
it's still pretty fun.
Yeah. That is hysterical. Cool. I had to know.
I don't know
All right.
why I went from Barack to Paris though. Like that
Well,
is
no,
such the
I'm so glad that you did because I was even talking to my wife about it. I was like, am I really going to come out with this lame, like gimmicky question? And then in my head, I was playing the joke. I was like, and then I saw you got followed by Paris Hilton. And I was like, oh, damn, he's
yeah. You
real big time.
you just got to go with it.
uh, all right. So I start basically every conversation out with the same question. The background picture on your Twitter, I realized that you actually just changed it. I find it to be a really great conversation starter. So tell me about that picture and tell me what it means to you.
Yeah, well, that's funny. So I'll tell you what the one that I changed it from was because I
Yeah, I
think
want to know.
that evolution is kind of interesting. So the what I had up for a little while was this shot that I took from a family trip up the coast. We went up to Oregon and then we came down, the Northern California coast. And when we were doing that, we stopped in this place called Elk Prairie, and it was this campground right at the base of the redwoods. And I woke up one morning and there was like this just epic clearing of these massive redwoods. And then this little car was driving by, and you realize like, dude, these things are like 30 stories tall, right? Like you just put it in perspective, and it was such a magical moment. I just happened to have my camera or my phone, and I was able to grab a shot. And that whole trip, I was taking these photos that were like, really sort of impactful, big nature, like, I'm a small human, look how big the world is
Mm,
moments. And what happened is it really connected me to my creativity through photography in a way that like I kind of hadn't put together up till that point. I've always taken photos on all my trips, but all of a sudden it was like, oh wow, like I'm actually like this is a way for me to express myself creatively that that I hadn't had for a while. So that was up, and my website actually uses a bunch of that imagery. I kind of like branded everything with that. Um, and then the NFT thing kind of popped off. And that was the first photo that I minted as an NFT, and it sold immediately. And so that has an interesting story. But then as I started getting into the NFT space, I started to go back into like my design roots and kind of
mm,
start creating new stuff. And so what's up there now, what it's been replaced by was this triptych series that I created specifically for digital art that used some old photography but layered on new design assets. So in a way, it's like an evolution for me of kind of where I've been with the old photography and where I'm going with new creative output.
that's so cool. A couple of things I want to comment. I went to the Redwoods with my wife just this past year, and I know exactly what you mean. You see pictures of it, but it's still kind of it's difficult to explain it. Like I guess you
Yeah,
got to see it. All of a sudden, you're in this forest, and you feel like some giant like pterodactyl It's just gonna
Yeah.
come down and like
Yeah.
wipe you up. You feel so tiny. So a comment on that, but yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. I did as much research on your art as I could for this conversation, but in your new picture with the triptych series, I think you called it, in the background of the picture, some of your old photography is like embedded in there, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny, like my story, my creative journey, if you will, you
Yeah.
know, comes from like really kind of establishing myself as a designer who was doing a lot of commercial work within music. So album packaging, posters, whatever. And it was a lot of layering stuff. And it was a lot of like that kind of, you know, really graphic design based output. And then it went, my career shifted a lot. It went from that to like writing code and doing stuff digitally. And then it went to music videos and creating, you know, content that way. Then it went into VR and XR and has continued to sort of follow like more emerging technology trends.
Mm-hmm.
But throughout all of that, I would have never once called myself a photographer. But throughout all of that, when I look back in my, you know, photos, like my app, there are so many photos I've taken, whether it be like in Thailand or in Beijing or, you know, wherever I was going to like shoot stuff and take meetings and whatnot. And like, I'm a creative. And I look back at that stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I have a creative eye and it shows up in my photography in a way that I could have, they were just my personal photos.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden I've released, when I started to release them publicly, like let people see them, and I started to get these comments from other photographers who are like professional photographers, because I don't consider myself one. They're like, dude, you're a photographer. And I was like, no, I'm not. And they're like, no, you are. Like, and it took me a few weeks to like be like, no, that's okay. I'm a photographer. I'm also these other things too. And so those photos that are in those pieces, like they are like the Flatiron Building, right? And they're the towers in Chicago, those brutalist towers. And then it's a roadway out in the desert. And these are things that like just really remind me of where I've been.
Yeah.
And then all that layering on top is really this thing of like, okay, let's like flip that and let's make it something new.
Sure.
So, because that's where I'm at in career and stuff right now. Like everything that's going on with technology and art is all like flipping, and it's fascinating.
Fascinating it is. And we're gonna get there. I'm dying to talk about this NFT space, but you're just saying things that are relating to me so much. For instance, when you said like I'm a photographer, I got my career as a writer, but it wasn't until maybe 3 years ago that I actually started saying like I'm a writer. It would be like, oh, what do you do? It was like, oh, I write blog posts on this website that I created, or like I built
Yeah.
this community by writing blog posts. And I know like we're just talking about semantics really, but something happens when when you just start actually identifying yourself as a professional, right? Because it's not just a thing that I do, it's a thing that I am. And so when you say it that way, I know the people listening to this, and you've actually been pretty open about this kind of stuff, even just on Twitter, about like, holy shit, like I'm sharing my art out there, like I'm putting myself out there, being vulnerable, you know, like we all feel that. And then it's just that switch where you say like, no, this isn't just a thing I do, this is a thing that I am. And I think that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Well, it's funny because I mean, you just hit on one, you know, sort of big point for me is like, and I talk to all of the young creatives that I mentor about this too. Vulnerability in what we do is so important, because if you're not being vulnerable and showing your sort of true self through whatever your artistic expression is, then you're not going to connect with through that expression, right? And that might be your words, it might be your art, it might be whatever. And for me, I had a really hard time being vulnerable and expressing my creativity, like mine, right? I
Hmm.
could do it for you
Yeah.
and I could do it for a client and I could like put it all out there on that project. But when it came to releasing like stuff that was connected to me, I have never done that. You know, I have a 20-year art career, creative career that has never once, you know, been personal work out in galleries or in a space or anything.
Wow.
So when it came to, I mean, really just a few months ago, stepping out and being like, I'm gonna be as vulnerable as I could possibly be and put this thing out there in the world for people to judge or buy or praise or, you know, tear down,
Shit
whatever.
on.
Yeah. Like it's that moment of just like, I'm going to lob it over the wall and then just fucking hide, you know, because it was really scary. And, but through that fear and through that vulnerability, what's happened is, you know, my community of artists and my network has grown exponentially in the past few months in a way that like is completely foreign to me, completely unimaginable to me. Like I'm like connected and friends with artists that I'm like, dude, you are fucking incredible. And
Mm,
I would have only ever like seen your work and been like, that's dope. But now we're having conversations about life and collaboration just because I was vulnerable enough to be like, here I am,
yep.
you know? So I don't know, that vulnerability and that like that push into that space is done. And this is why I can tell it to a young creative. I can be like, you need to do this, but I couldn't do it for myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because as they're trying to figure out how to network and trying to build their professional career, I would always give them that advice. But now I'm taking it instead, you know, and it's actually like, my creative life has become so much more fulfilling just in the past couple of months.
I love that, man. I love that for a lot of reasons, both like professionally and creatively, but just getting to know you, that's like a liberating experience, you know? And so like, I'm almost happy for you in that way that, that you get to go down this new journey. I'm not sure if he's your friend or not. But I always felt that way about Bobby Hundreds, where, when I talk to my wife, she knows the writers I look up to. And she's like, but I don't get it. He's got a streetwear brand. I was like, no, but you don't understand. He was like, he really revolutionized this idea of creating a brand through just honest, raw, authentic, creative writing. And
Yeah.
he was always on just like my pedestal of like people that I want to emulate in a way.
It's so funny. Bobby, we have been in similar orbits since they started the hundreds, you know, and we've connected here and there over the years. And I did a streetwear or a footwear line with Dave Grohl called Hooves, which was like a black metal Nike Air Jordan. If you like, that was that's the best way to describe it. And I remember when we did that line, we took it over to Bobby and he featured it on the blog,
Yeah.
you know, and so we've always been connected in some way. But what's happened recently is we're both part of this like friends with benefits
Yeah.
thing, you know, at this DAO, and then we're both connected to Mike Shinoda in a couple different ways, and we both sort of realized like, dude, why are we not hanging out? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why have we never actually like put it together, like get our families together and like do stuff? And so that's kind of the next step with Bobby. It's so funny, like we're developing a friendship digitally, you know, over Twitter and over some other, you know, mediums, that is turning into a more true friendship, which is weird for me. I've had a hard time making like, you know, I know this is more of like a professional blog, but like this really relates. I've had a hard time forming bonds with people my entire life. I can do it, like I can walk into a room and we can talk creative and we can talk like a project
Yeah.
all day long. But as soon as you take it out of there, like it's just been awkward for me. And so that's one thing that's really interesting with the vulnerability has come this idea that like, oh wow, the network is expanding like personally and professionally. It's cool. And I'm
Yeah.
like 40 just figuring this out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, fuck.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's actually why I started my podcast for that reason. I had a speech impediment growing up, and it just got to the point where I moved to Nashville because I lived in Florida, and you know I got sober with all of those guys, so you have like a
Yeah.
bond, right? And they're just kind of like automatic friends. And then all of a sudden I'm here and I don't know anybody, and I always struggle with like talking to people. And so like through this creative medium of just be willing to like I've had some really fucking bad podcast episodes, you know, and you get
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
just like, oh, like I feel
You just got to do it
terrible.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just publish it. But all right, man. So let me get into this, dude, because this
Yeah.
NFT space is very exciting. Um, I'm excited about it for the support of artists. I'm excited about it for like the crazy technological implications that it could have when my brain really goes down the rabbit hole. But I want to start with a I guess it's a quote when I first reached out to you on Twitter and I said hey, it looks like you're into this NFT space. I'd love to talk to you about it. What you said is, after years in the digital art world without really a way to monetize outside of brands and commissions, et cetera, this gives us an outlet to do that. So I think we're all pretty familiar with what an NFT is. If not, Google it, figure it out.
Yeah.
And so why, as an artist, is this new concept so exciting to you?
It's funny, that question changes almost, or the answer to that question changes almost week by week right now,
Mm,
because the space is evolving so fast, and how they can be used is evolving, and what people are doing with them is evolving. But I think at its core, what it allows an artist to do, what it's allowed me to do, and a lot of the people I'm now connected with in this space, is is put your work out in a way that bypasses all of the gatekeepers and allows any value applied to that work to be captured by the creator. Those two things, gatekeeperless, distribution of art, and then the ability to capture value directly back, is, I mean, that hasn't existed before.
yeah.
You've either had to put your work out through like a social media platform, and you'll put it out on Instagram, and like, you'll get likes for it, and whatever, but like, they're a gatekeeper and they're collecting all the value out of that. You're getting value out of it, building a following, and people might book you for things, but the work itself is not like direct value. But there's more to it than that. Like, I mean, you'll hear a lot of people in the space say, I'm doing it for the art. I'm doing it for the art. And you're like, I mean, come on, really? Like, it's a smart contract that people are buying. And if you're just doing it for the art, then why are you releasing it as an NFT?
Yeah.
Other than maybe for for the providence of it, the ability for it to last like,
Hmm.
forever on the blockchain. But like, come on, right? There's a financial component to all this shit. There just is. But at the same time, what's happening is when that takes a secondary seat, and it is about art and it is about community, what you realize is that like, now all of a sudden creators are building community with each other and with patrons, collectors of work, people who love art, that is completely separate and completely like creator led. So now, like, these little pockets of just like art lovers and art makers are sprouting up in a way that feels really revolutionary, because it just hasn't existed like this before.
Yeah. I think we're all kind of figuring it out as we go along. You mentioned something though, which I think is important to distinguish. I've always been a fan of Seth Godin and his blog, and he wrote a blog basically saying the opposite of, well, I think he's saying that the value in the art we create isn't necessarily in the one-on-one transaction of it, but rather in the change that the art itself happens within what he would call culture. And so I buy that and I see that and I think to myself, okay, I've written a couple thousand blog posts in my life, right? And I've never sold a blog post, but it creates leverage, so to speak, for you to uh, any number of things, grow a brand, build a following, get appearances, what have you. And so there's people that I think might be worried about the idea of, now I'm not creating art for the sake of changing the culture. I'm creating art for the sake of a transaction, because now I have like one-on-one access to a transaction, basically, to like a buyer. And you know what? I go back and forth with that, man, because I think to myself, yeah, I see the point, but I also think to myself, how many people have just been making digital art or any kind of art? How many people have gotten their gifts stolen from them and other people use their gifts? Like Shithead Steve is an example,
Yeah.
right? And I always think of Shia LaBeouf. I call him Shia LaBeouf, but he was in this, Hot Ones, that YouTube
Yeah.
show where they eat the hot wings. He was on that, and he said, "Are memes art?" And he said, "Yes, anything that moves you is art." And that always stuck to me. And I think to myself, well, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what the medium is. If it's moving me, it's
Yeah.
art. So I know that you're expecting a question here. My question is basically like, where is this contrast of good and evil, right, behind creating art to move the culture and creating art just to sell it?
Well, yeah, I think both things exist, whether or not you're talking about an NFT,
Mm,
right? I think both, like when you talk about a musician Like they might get into playing music because they love the art of playing music, and they want to, that's how they express themselves as a writer or as a, you know, instrumentalist or whatever. But also in parallel to that, I don't think you're ever going to talk to a musician who's like, yeah, I don't want the record deal and I don't want to go on tour and I don't want the money in the house and the thing. Like they're getting into it for both purposes.
Yeah.
For the most part. Otherwise it's just a hobby.
Yeah.
Right. And so any artist at the same time, like it's about, you know, getting my art out and making my art, not just me, but any artist, but it's also about like building a following or getting it in galleries or being able to support yourself off of it so that you can continue to do it or whatever. Some of those people are going to be more altruistic in it and like, I'm going to use the money I make off of the sales of my art or my music or whatever in order to continue to spread a good message. And others will be like, no, I'm just out here for the cash grab. And there's, I mean, in a lot of ways, unless you're like harming people, like both of those things can kind of, it is what it is. Like it can kind of coexist. I tend to lean to the other side of it, to the altruistic side of it, which is like, let's make art for art's sake, or let's make art to move people, or let's make art that can, you know, elicit change or whatever. I think the NFT space is interesting in that regard because people might be out there making that art and they still can and they still will. But now all of a sudden they can, if a piece of art or a meme or, you know, whatever becomes popular enough or has enough interest around it, they can also now say, instead of just releasing it out into the ether, I can put it on as I can attach an NFT to it, and somebody who really values it can now also participate in the ownership of that thing. And so it can serve a dual purpose. So now I may have gotten, you know, 10 million views on this meme that I created, but now I can also reclaim it and get some value for it in a way that like the social media platforms that are just proliferating it can never give me, right? And again, I'm just using me as like the proverbial me. And I've seen this play out a couple of different ways. Allison, who was Creepy Chan, I don't know if you remember that photo, but if you look up Creepy Chan, she's like this, like, it was when she was living in her parents' house and she's like super creepy, like looking at the camera. And it became this like photo that like blew up on 4chan and like, you know, turned into this whole thing. And she ended up posting that. And her whole reason behind it was to reclaim it. And by saying, I am the creator of this and putting it on the blockchain, and now someone can purchase that piece of internet history. I think she sold it for 60 ETH, which comes out to about $120,000, and completely changed her life, right? And in a way that like the meme changed her life. She actually built like a career out of that, but now the money actually changes her life too in a different way. And she's sort of paid back for sort of what she was given out into the market. Another one is this guy, I'm gonna totally butcher his name, but he just did a collaboration with BT. I wanna say it's Sean. But anyway, this guy who did a collaboration with BT around disarming the bombs and things that are in the ocean out, you know, off the coast of Maui and off the coast of Puerto Rico. Like apparently we just like, when we're done with munitions, we're like, cool, just dump it in the ocean. And that's a massive ecological disaster. And he's using this piece of art that he created and minted as NFTs, and all the funding from that is going into those efforts. And they're actually going to be able to remove some of the ones off the coast of Maui. And it's also going into PR for that piece. So, you know, he's using it as a change leverage, you know, point of leverage for change. So, you know, I think all these things coexist. And it's like, yeah, there's people out there chasing the money or chasing the clout or whatever. But I think like, just like in anything, that stuff starts to look pretty transparent pretty quick.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think it's almost like as new things emerge, we have no choice other than, how do I say this, almost to respect the intelligence of people to sniff things out. You know what I mean? Like eventually it always just flattens itself out. And that's my viewpoint on it, at least. I think the world's just always going to change. But what you talked about with that meme, I think the meme stuff is so interesting because we can laugh about memes all you want, but they have huge cultural significance.
They do.
In
The thing that I don't like about some of the conversation I hear around memes is this question about what is art. And you hear it a lot from the fine art community. who is bashing NFTs and bashing digital art. And they're like, no, that's not art. Well, why is it not art?
Hmm.
Because you say it's not art? Because you didn't put it in your gallery? Well, I would venture to say that it's affected culture in more ways than some of the art that you claim in your gallery, right?
I would totally agree. I have had like absolute tear laughter at some of the Grumpy Cat memes I've seen over the years. And I think to
Yeah,
myself, Grumpy Cat, and this is just one example, who knows, billions and billions of impressions in people's minds. The example I use, I wrote an article about it, basically what the fuck is an NFT on my blog. And one of the examples I use is, you know, that little baby on a beach that's got like his fist pumps. Like
yeah,
everybody knows that baby. And some poor sucker kid out there is probably like 12 years old now. And meanwhile, advertising agencies, gazillions of people got tens of millions of views on social media by basically taking this kid, and he never gave, I guess in a way he gave permission just by uploading it, but there's still like a by proxy of the fact that he didn't realize the cultural significance of that meme. And that meme is hysterical, and it's definitely
yeah.
moved me, and it's created a lot of financial impact in the world. So like, why wouldn't that person have the right to say like, no, this is an idea that I put into the ecosystem and I need to claim ownership over it?
Well, and I think that's like the internet history part of NFTs is really interesting. And I think, you know, Foundation is a platform that has really embraced that. And they
Hmm.
started really on the art side, and they still do a lot in the art community, but they've really found a niche for like bringing the memes back and like allowing that internet history to be reclaimed. They just sold a piece, the Snowden piece, which sold for 5 million.
It's insane.
Um, yeah, and then just got resold for 7 million on the secondary. So when you look at that, like that's massive. Those are like, whether you call them art, whether you call them internet history, whether they're both, you know, like they have massive cultural significance. On the other side of it, for digital artists, what I find fascinating is, because I've played in this space for a while, and a lot of the people that I've sort of come up with have been in this space too. You're talking about people who like are serious professionals at what they do, like art that is just absolutely mind-blowing. Like when you look at it, you're like, you know, it's just like,
Beautiful.
right? And where does that art go? Up until this
Mhm.
point, where has it gone, right? It's gone on tour with a band and you got paid for a work for hire to put it out that way. Or maybe it made it into a commercial, or maybe you made it into a film and it was a work for hire and it went that way. But very few, like almost none, of those artists were able to like parlay that stuff into a career based on just the art, where they retain control and copyright, but they are able to go and show it and sell it in a way, like a painter does or like a
Mhm.
photographer does, because there just hasn't been a place to display it. The fine art community hasn't valued it. There's all these reasons. Now all of a sudden, you've got a way to like mark authenticity and distribute and sell that work that is purely digital. It's, you know, born of the blockchain. It is purely digital, and this art is purely digital. They're like a match made in heaven. Like the NFTs are the mechanism to sell that art and capture value in that art. So now you've got guys and girls who are creating that stuff, selling it, able to make a living, so they no longer have to go out and like do that soul sucking work for the
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah.
And I've talked to many of them who I'm like, are you doing this? Are you doing that for this client or this? They're like, no, I don't do that anymore. What I do is I make art, and then I put it out as NFTs and people collect it, and they're making a living that way. And that's beautiful, because now all of a sudden, when someone approaches them to do work, it's not, hey, let me do a work for hire with you and I'll pay you pennies on the dollar to take that and make it mine. It's like, no, 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 there's a 50-50 split here.
Yeah.
I'm retaining copyright and you can license it from me. Like that's brand new.
Yeah, it is brand new. And I think it's tough for people to kind of wrap their heads around it. But this example, I don't know why this example popped into my head as to when something is born of the internet, we automatically just assume that it's for everybody, right? And so when I was writing that blog, this blog was almost like a research paper for me, where like, this is going to be big. I need to figure out what's going on here. And so I thought to myself, what's one of the most impactful digital things that's ever created? And for some reason, Buzz Lightyear popped into my head. I
Mm.
think Pixar and animation changed the whole way that we view movies, and Toy Story was the first one to do that. So like that first file, imagine being the guy that actually created Buzz Lightyear on Illustrator or something like that. And there's an original AI file of the first sketchings of Buzz Lightyear. And then when you put it like that and you see that, okay, there's an iconic piece. The example we always use is the Mona Lisa, right? When you say Buzz Lightyear, we all know what you're talking about. And somewhere there was an original AI file of one of the most impactful impactful graphics made in like cinema history. Well, how would that not have value? And now all of a sudden we have a way to say like, no, this is the original. I'm the creator. What is it worth to you, right?
What and the interesting thing I think about NFTs is like right now it's being applied in that way and
Mm.
providing value for digital art and other things, internet history like we talked about. But it also has an application that spreads far beyond just art. It's authentication of anything, right?
It's already
Like
gets weird.
yeah, and it starts to go like really really big and
Hmm.
really far reaching because think about it. I own a home. I have my title. That title is non-fungible. Yeah, I'm not going to sell you a portion of my home, right? Like I own the home. And so wouldn't it make sense that that ownership wasn't just like a paper deed that was on file somewhere, like in a filing cabinet and they scanned it? Like, wouldn't it make sense that it was just like an authenticated digital token that showed the transfer of ownership across its life? And you know what I mean?
Of course.
Like things like that make it's going to take a while to get there,
Yeah.
but that's where this goes. And so when people talk about like, oh, NFT is like, this and that's just a fad or whatever, it's like, well, actually, it's not because the underlying technology is what's going to power most everything that's transferable, moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up because sometimes I can see my family's eyes glaze over when I start to tell them how this works. But this is when it really clicked for me. When I realized that there's going to be stylists that do nothing but claim ownership of clothing launches that they make only for video game avatars. And then I
Right.
start going like, oh my God, that means that there's such thing as virtual real estate. That means that eventually when
Which
we start
exists right
having,
now. Yeah.
yeah, that it already exists. And then it means,
Yeah.
okay, that means that if a business wants to put like a virtual reality conference together, that somebody's going to buy a token to say like I have ownership over this space so I can set my virtual booth up with my virtual banner to sell my own products. And then like you
Yeah.
just start going down the rabbit hole. Um and okay, so there's a million places that I can take this, but let me keep this centered on what we're talking about. uh, this really has huge impacts on virtual music, and who would ever think that we would want to see a virtual concert? But Fortnite is showing that that is obviously got a market for it. And so you got a lot of things going on with your life. I'm just going to open this up for you. Virtual music, where do you see it? How is this going to change our culture?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's great. It's a good segue. And um, first, before I answer that, I'll talk about why I think virtual music, the metaverse, virtual goods, whatever you want to call it, is very real. Like a lot of older people, older generations will see that stuff and go, well, it's virtual, it's not real. But if you talk to my 10-year-old and you ask her if that thing that she just bought for Adopt Me in Roblox is real or not, it is as real and
Oh
even
yeah.
more so than the toy that she has in her toy box. Like they would rather spend their allowance on digital goods that they're buying in game. And what's happening right now, they're in walled gardens. So you're in Roblox, you buy it in Roblox, you can't take it out of Roblox.
Hmm.
You buy a skin in Fortnite, it's in Fortnite, you can't take it out of Fortnite. But the metaverse, as we all think about it, is really that like open bordered or at least connected walled gardens. So now things that I buy can transfer with me and they're in a wallet of some kind and I take them with me, just like I take my stuff or my stuff inhabits my house or whatever.
Yeah.
So when you talk NFTs, what you're talking about is a wallet, a mechanism to move those digital goods around with you that are tied to you. And now all of a sudden they can exist in all these different worlds. So why that matters is things like virtual music. So, you know, you sort of alluded to it. I have a big sort of career change that's happening right now, where I've been advising a company called Authentic Artists since 2019, and I've just come over to lead creative for them. So I'm the executive creative director for Authentic Artists. And what we're doing is creating AI generative virtual artists. So music created by an AI in machine learning that is then tied to a virtual character who, you know, becomes an artist, has their own backstory, their own persona, their own look and feel, their own sound. And that music is fully unencumbered by publishing or, you know, label rights. There are no rights holders. That virtual artist owns their masters, if you will, right? And they're able to create it 24/7 in real time at commercial quality, because we're working with, you know, it's a human and machine collaboration. We're working with producers who, you know, do incredible work, like guys like, you know, Young Guru and Mike Shinoda, and they're putting their stamp, or they're putting a sound on this and then sort of like setting it loose in the world. So these virtual artists can then travel that metaverse we just talked about and can perform in Roblox, or can, you know, have an interactive experience on Unreal Engine, or over in Unity, or on Twitch like we've launched, or in real life, right? And in collaboration with, because we've got video screens everywhere, or holograms or AR, in collaboration with physical artists. And it sounds far-fetched if you don't believe in the concept of virtual. But if you believe in the concept of this virtual layer that is already over everything that we do, it sounds less far-fetched, because you're, especially to the kids, like, again, going back to my daughter, when I told her what we're doing and she saw the characters, she's just as invested in those characters as she would be, you know, Billie Eilish, which is her like idol, right? And those two things in her mind are one, they're not one and the same. Like, obviously she knows one's a human and one's a digital creation, but in terms of interest, like, she can be interested in both. They both serve very different purposes, and just exist sort of natively in the world we're building. So you can either embrace that or push against it. And I think there's a rub in there that's happening right now in culture.
I think there's a rub, but I think people have already embraced it a lot more than they even realize. Like,
Yeah,
Siri is a person, and she's in
right.
all of our lives, and nobody questions it. And then I don't think to myself like, oh, I can't remember the last time I tried to say fuck on my phone and it didn't autocorrect to duck, and I didn't go fucking Siri, and everybody
Yeah,
didn't know what I was talking about.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So we have already, as a culture, whether as individuals or not, have decided that we are okay with these digital um, personalities, personas, whatever you want to call it. I think with that being said, though, it is worth doing a double take. When I was looking at the Authentic Artists website, it says interactive virtual artists using deep learning technology. At first, I'm like, wait, is that a typo? Didn't they mean interactive virtual art? And I'm like, oh, no, they're actually creating artists.
That's
And
right.
yeah. And then, like, you know, okay, so on one sentence I said we're all accepting this, we've already accepted it, and then the other side I'm like, no, you're building artists with their own music that exist while not also existing. And I think it I don't even, like, I'm stuck even trying to say what I think about that. It's very it's new, and it's going to take some time to get our heads around it, but I think we've already kind of accepted that we're going to allow it.
Well, I think the one, so I had this conversation yesterday with another brilliant creator that I met in the NFT space. Like, I just keep having these like illuminating, inspiring conversations with people. And we were talking about, we're having one of our virtual artists collaborate with a physical artist, a physical, like visual artist, who's using AI to generate portraitures. So his physical art is actually digital art that's
Yeah.
using AI to generate visuals. And then our virtual artist who's using AI to generate music is going to collaborate and score that. It's all super meta, right? Like, but it's her first, Naomi, one of our artists, it's her first collaboration like that. And what we were talking about is this idea that if you look at any future looking publication, book, movie, whatever, Ready Player One is the example we were using.
Sure.
It's always dystopian, and it's always like higher powerless, if you will. Like, just to put it in like super like esoteric terms, it's always like AI and technology has turned our environment into this dystopian wasteland where humans have to claw to survive, right? Matrix, like, it doesn't matter. Every one of these films is like the same vibe. And I think what a lot of those creators get wrong about where we're going, and this is my view, but I think it's shared by quite a few in this space, is humans inherently have a connection to something bigger and have a level of empathy and humanity, as we would call it, that is always going to shine through. Even if shit gets really dark, even if there's bad people in the world, even if there's wars, even if people use AI for bad instead of good, like all of that stuff, fundamentally humans still exist and we're still here. And that dystopian sort of view is to say that there's like no spirit, nothing bigger that we're tapping into, no spirituality, like no humanity, no empathy, right? Like that is somehow gone. And it's just frankly not the case. Like, look at what we just went through. We all just went through a horrifying pandemic that has completely reshaped how we do business and how we live life and what our priorities are. And what's coming out of that is much more connection to each other through isolation, right? Because humans have this like evolutionary spirit of like, I got to survive, right? Like fundamentally, that's where it comes from. Like, if we're going to survive as a species, we have to stick together and we have to grow. So I think a lot of the rub comes from people being scared of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ultimately every time you see pushback against something. I remember it happened in music when, Napster and the MP3
Sure.
and like everybody pushed back, that's not, right? And then all of a sudden it upended the music industry. And then streaming, right? And then, I mean, you name it, you can go down the row. TV, when, TV came into your home, the film industry was in a panic, right? And now look at those two coexisting and what's come out of that. NFTs are the same thing. Fine art world is freaking out because they don't get to be the gatekeepers and control it anymore. But in 3 years, like, we won't be calling them NFTs. They'll just be digital art, and everything is just going to have an NFT attached to it. It just is what it is.
Yeah, we'll just have screens in our homes that.
So like all this AI talk and all this like stuff about like, like is it troubling for humanity? Is it going to work? Well, look, I mean, who knows what's going to work? But like the experimentation, the fun with it, the like, following the trail of, what's happening in culture and what we're reacting to in video games. And it's just like natural. That's just what's coming, and we'll coexist with it, I think.
I'm hard pressed to find somebody that actually thinks, oh, that'll never happen.
Yeah.
It's just like, of course it's going to. And, man, it is a little bit kind of heady what you were talking about, where every time we think about technology, it's always some kind of dystopian, like some dry dystopian wasteland where we've all lost our humanity. And I was just thinking about this the other day, just with the whole concept of decentralization in general, because there's one side that just says like everything needs to be decentralized. Humans can't trust each other. Every institution in the world has failed you, right? And let's say that takes on, which it will, like middlemen in general, and this will take a while, but just, I mean, who knows, brokers, right? Like your mortgage broker, there's no need for that when you could just stamp authentication of something. And so, okay, like, let's just assume that the world will decentralize, quote unquote, in one way or another, but we're still people. And no matter what we do, this freaking thing inside my head is still a couple 100,000 years old, and it is just going to gravitate towards like, I need to do other shit with other people. And that's just never, ever, ever going to change. So yeah, like I am optimistic about it. I see this being as some kind of, be careful with the word harmonious, right? It'll be rough, but I'm optimistic that regardless of what technology does to our current standard of living, like we're still gonna do it together and keep our humanity in the process.
Well, I think that the interesting thing about decentralization that I'm starting to wrap my head around is the paradox of it. Like the decentralization that we're talking about causes more connection and community. Like that's a weird paradox. Like that, it almost feels like it shouldn't be. Like decentralization would mean now we're all our own islands.
Yeah.
But what it's doing, it's actually like fundamentally removing barriers that have blocked people from connecting before, right? And so that's what I see happening like right now in a microcosm in the art world. You'll get in a clubhouse room or something and there will be 50 artists from all walks of life, from all country, people from Turkey and Cuba and San Francisco and LA and whatever, fine artists, commercial artists, people who just like to doodle, and all these different people are now like all of a sudden they're all rallied around this thing because all those walls have come down. And so that decentralization acts as a connective tissue in a weird way, right? Like, I don't know. It's definitely a paradox because it's not one of those things that like immediately reveals itself.
Sure.
But then as soon as you're in the middle of it, you realize, oh shit, that's what's happening
here. Yeah. There's a million analogies that you can make with that, but ultimately I've seen that as well, where when you remove gatekeepers, people just naturally go to the people that they vibe with. And now all of those societal gatekeepers are gone, basically. Like eventually the fine artists that are kind of sticking their nose up at you guys are all going to be in the same rooms with you, because you're just going to realize that this whole culture that we've invented on what art is gone. And so now let's just talk about cool shit with each other.
Yeah, exactly. And people have their own opinions on Beeple and his work, and and the price of that big sale and whether it was valid or not, and like none of that matters. None of it matters if you think Banksy is a genius or a crook. None of it matters. What matters is like these are big cultural moments that are shaping the world and are connecting new sets of people that wouldn't have been connected before.
Yeah, man. I totally agree. And I'm excited about it. It's going to be a wild ride for sure. The thing I'm most excited about, and you're giving me so much of your time, I don't want to keep you too much longer. And thank you so much for being so generous with your time. But the thing that I'm really excited about is right now, when people say NFTs, we think digital art. But that was just like the first most pragmatic starting point with it. And with all of the ways that this could happen, I'm excited to see what the hell is going to happen, right? Like when we created the internet, we never thought to think of a social timeline until all of a sudden we did. And it's like, what is going to be the thing where 5 years from now, where it's like, oh, like, of course that's going to be the thing that either a blockchain or an NFT will create. And I'm excited to figure out like what that is.
Well, yeah, and I think like, some of the things that people are just now starting to wrap their heads around. We've had social tokens for a while, which is like, you buy a set of social tokens and you get access to a community and right. But the NFT as a, one-to-one, access point for a community or for an event, or, as a way to authenticate, like I am Jeff, right? And I am here in this community or at this event or whatever, like that's like the next version that we're going to get to. So it moves from art into that, right? And all of the things that can be done with that around, like if I know who all these people are, like, and it's very clear, like you can start to do things with those people that are based on their ownership of that one token or that set of tokens, right? And when I look at our virtual artists and everything that we're doing, like they're born of the internet, they're born of the metaverse. Their whole existence, everything that they do at some point is going to have an NFT attached to it, because it's going to be the way that you participate in the fandom around them, and that's not just for them. They'll probably start it and then physical artists will, pick that up in the right way. But yeah, man, it's such an exciting world. Like it's like, it does feel like, and it almost feels like cliche to say this, but it does feel like a Renaissance moment.
For sure.
It's like a digital technological Renaissance moment in the same way that we had the art Renaissance, or we had, the mechanical, the Industrial Revolution, and that's what's happening right now.
I think that is probably the most apt um, way to describe it. It is absolutely going to be something that we look back on 20 years ago and be like, oh, that was the moment where the new way of humanity started. Like Renaissance is the only way that you can explain this. And I mean, I have a 1-month-old, and sometimes I pick him up and I just stare at him because it's a fucking trip, as I'm sure you can say. And I think to myself, like, what is your world gonna look like? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
totally, totally. I still want my flying skateboard, and like,
Yeah,
and my
and like
flying
after
cars and
all
all
of
that
this,
shit.
I
But
still don't
yeah,
have a flying skateboard. I mean, like,
yeah,
all right, I got a boosted board, and like I'm happy to be whipping down the streets with it, but it doesn't fly, and that's the shit I was promised.
yeah, yeah. It's so funny, like going back to Bobby Hundreds. Like I remember the Hundreds did a promo around,
Those shoes.
that skateboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shoes, and they did the whole promo where they like brought the board and it looked like it was legit.
Hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, give me my flying skateboard and we'll be good.
That's so cool, man. All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much for your time. The world is opening back up. I got some business partners in LA. Next time I'm out west, we'll get together. We'll get some coffee, and it was great talking to you. I know
Yeah,
that we could sit down and shoot the shit for a couple hours on this, but I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks for having me, and likewise, I'll be in Nashville soon, actually. So we'll
Oh,
get
no way.
coffee in Nashville. Yeah, we got some friends
Perfect.
out there. Yeah.
Perfect. I love it.
All right,
Um,
man.
all right. So AuthenticArtist.ai, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Excellent.
authentic. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I will put
When
all
should we do that again?
the notes, and I'll put your Twitter on there. And all right, man, we'll do this again. Thanks so much,
Cool.
Jeff.
Thanks, Tim.